Mr. Speaker, I strongly support this bill. Good speaker.
Charles Chevelle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the previous Speaker made a proper concession just now that this bill does need careful discussion at the Select Committee, and I hope that given that the two larger parties at least are supporting it to that stage, it will get that careful scrutiny and discussion. I see that the Chair of the Select Committee is here and listening to the debate, and so I think the House can have that confident expectation. So the bill in the name of Scott Simpson, and I congratulate him on his good fortune for having it drawn from the ballot, aims to cure what I think he concedes is a very small number of cases where unusual events conspire to prevent a blood specimen being taken. For example, and the one I think that's been used in a number of the speeches to date is the one where there was a person who was addicted to drugs and had compromised veins. Now, the current situation is this. A breath result cannot be used as evidence once a blood test has been elected by the person who's been stopped at the side of the road or at a checkpoint or what have you for that purpose. And the bill would provide that breath tests can be used if a blood specimen was not able to be taken from the defendant, and the words of the bill are for any reason. Now, I think the concern that I would want to put on the record is the breadth of that expression, for any reason. I think people can see that it's a useful thing to try to plug a loophole. But I think what we do need to do is make sure that we don't, in the old cliched proverb, use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And what I wouldn't want to see by passing the legislation, if that's the ultimate fate of the bill, is legitimising a failure by the police to take effective action to ensure that there was a blood taker available in circumstances where the legislation would set out that expectation. And the problem that I have just on my reading of the bill is the breadth of that expression for any reason. It's very wide. It would include there being no blood taker on the roster that night. Now, I know, and I know other members in the House know, that police go to a heck of a lot of trouble at the moment to make sure that they can comply with the law. They do go to great lengths with their rosters to make sure that there is somebody who can take blood if that's the election that the driver on the scene makes. And let's remember that, you know, these safeguards exist for good reason. The breath test is generally pretty reliable, but we know that there are cases where it hasn't proved to be the case. We should also remember that random stopping is an innovation in our law. It's an exception to, and it was a controversial exception at the time that was introduced, to the principle that there ought to be a reasonable cause for a seizure or search. Now, we've seen the benefit of this innovation because we've seen the road toll come down, so we all support it. But we want to make sure that the safeguards are there. And we want to make sure that what we don't do is inadvertently give the police, who are pressured always for resources, some opportunity to cut corners by, for example, saying, well, look, we don't need to have a taker of blood on the roster because we've got this marvellous exception that Scott Simpson has given us that means that for any reason we can ignore that requirement. So, Sarah, I just want to make that contribution in my speech. I think, you know, the policy of this bill makes a lot of sense, but we don't want to invalidate the entire regime that Parliament has carefully put in place over a number of years. Breath test, then blood test, but the blood test as a proper backup in the case that it's needed to protect liberty and to ensure that people going about their lawful business are not subject to penalties. So, sir, in order to support this legislation further past the Select Committee, the Labor Party would need to see, at the very least, that matter considered and resolved appropriately.
David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the many concerns